Why you keep seeing 1111 during difficult times. You have been seeing it again, not once, not twice. Enough times that you stopped pretending it was nothing. You glance at a screen and there it is. 1111. You wake in the middle of the night and the clock reads 1111. You pause a video, check a receipt, look up from a conversation that has left you unsettled, and there it is again. The same 4 numbers. The same strange stillness that follows. And it keeps happening during the hard moments. Not when life feels easy. Not when things are clear and forward-moving and you feel like yourself. It happens when you are carrying something you cannot fully put down. When a relationship has shifted in ways you are still trying to understand. When a version of your life that once felt solid has started to feel uncertain, distant, or quietly dissolving. When you lie awake not because of noise, but because of the particular silence that comes when something inside you is changing, and you do not yet know what it is becoming. That is when 1111 appears. You have probably tried to explain it away. You told yourself it was selective attention, that you notice it now because you are looking for it. You reminded yourself that clocks show many numbers, and the mind gravitates toward patterns. You applied logic, and for a moment, the logic held. Then 1111 appeared again, in a context too precise to feel accidental, and the logic quietly stepped aside. What you are left with is a question most people never find the right words for. Not simply what does this number mean, but why does it keep appearing exactly here in the middle of this during the specific emotional weight of what you are currently living through? That question is worth taking seriously, because the answer is not mystical decoration. It is not a generic message of reassurance designed to make you feel temporarily better. It is something more specific, more psychologically real, and more personally relevant than most explanations have ever given it credit for. What you are about to explore is the precise relationship between 1111 and the emotional territory of difficult transitions. Why this number? Why now? Why the pattern intensifies exactly when life feels most uncertain, and what it may actually be pointing toward, not in the world around you, but in the awareness already shifting inside you, whether you have named it yet or not. The pattern has a logic, and by the time this ends, that logic will feel less like mystery, and more like something you already knew, but finally have the language to understand. The number that waits for the hard moments. Think back to the last few times you saw 1111. Not the times you happened to glance at a clock and it was there. The times that stayed with you. The times that made you stop even for a second and feel something you could not immediately name. Where were you? What were you thinking about? What had just happened, or what were you in the middle of trying to figure out? If you trace those moments honestly, you will likely find the same thing that thousands of people find when they do this exercise. 1111 was not there during the neutral moments. It was not there when you were deciding what to eat, or laughing without weight, or moving through a day that felt ordinary and undemanding. It was there when something was already pressing against you, when a thought you had been avoiding surfaced, when a conversation left a residue you could not shake, when the gap between the life you are living and the life you feel you are supposed to be living became, for just a moment, impossible to ignore. This is the first thing worth understanding about 1111. It does not behave like a random number. Random numbers appear randomly, during good moments, bad moments, unremarkable moments, all with equal indifference. But 1111 has an emotional signature. It has a context in which it consistently appears, and that context is almost always one of internal friction, unresolved tension, or the quiet turbulence of a life in the middle of changing. You might be tempted to explain this away by saying you simply notice it more when you are emotionally activated, that your attention is sharper during difficult moments, and so you catch numbers you would otherwise miss. That explanation sounds reasonable, but it does not hold when you examine it carefully, because the question is not just why you notice 1111 more during difficult times. The question is why 1111 is the number you notice, not 347, not 822. Not any of the hundreds of other number combinations that appear throughout any given day. This specific pattern, with this specific symmetry, in this specific emotional context. That is not attention bias. That is a signal with a signature. And the fact that you are here asking about it means you have already sensed this, that the pattern is not random, that it is tied to something real, and that the something real is connected to exactly what you are currently going through. The number is not waiting for your life to calm down before it appears. It is appearing precisely because your life has not calmed down. It is appearing because you are in the kind of emotional state that makes what it carries possible to receive. That raises the next question. What does a difficult time actually do to a person, not just emotionally, but perceptually? What opens inside you when the ordinary structures of your life begin to loosen? What difficult times open inside you? There is something nobody tells you about going through a hard period. Everyone tells you what it costs. The sleep, the clarity, the easy confidence you use to carry into rooms without thinking about it. Everyone acknowledges the weight, the way difficult times press on you from directions you did not expect, the way they make simple things feel complicated and complicated things feel impossible. But almost nobody talks about what difficult times open, because alongside everything they take from you, hard periods do something else, something quieter and in the long run, far more significant. They thin the walls between you and your own interior. They dissolve the comfortable layers of distraction, routine, and certainty that you normally move through the world wrapped in. And when those layers dissolve, something that was always present but usually filtered out becomes suddenly, unmistakably visible. Pattern, meaning, signal. Under normal psychological conditions, the human mind operates with a very efficient filtering system. It takes in an enormous amount of sensory and symbolic information every moment and immediately sorts it into relevant and irrelevant. Most of what surrounds you is placed in the irrelevant category before it ever reaches your conscious awareness. This is not a flaw. It is what allows you to function without being overwhelmed by the sheer density of information that exists in any given moment. But the filtering system is calibrated for stability. It is designed for a life that feels predictable, structured, and emotionally settled. When that stability begins to shift, when uncertainty enters, when loss occurs, when a significant transition begins to move through you, the filtering system loses some of its rigidity. What was previously sorted into irrelevant begins to surface. This is why people in the middle of grief or major life change or emotional crisis often report a heightened sensitivity to symbolic experience. Not because they are becoming irrational, because they are becoming more permeable, more open, more available to layers of information that the defended, settled mind routinely excludes. Difficult times do not make you weaker in your perception. In a very specific and important sense, they make you more capable of perceiving, more attuned to pattern, more sensitive to meaning, more able to notice what was always there but previously invisible. 1111 was not absent before your difficult period began. It was appearing on clocks and screens just as it is now. But you were not available to receive it. Your filtering system was working efficiently, sorting it into the background along with everything else that did not fit the immediate demands of a stable, forward-moving life. What changed is not the number. What changed is you. And the you that is now noticing, the you that is more open, more sensitive, more permeable to pattern, is not a diminished version of yourself. It is, in a very real sense, a more aware one. Awareness made possible by exactly the kind of difficulty you have been trying to survive. That does not make the difficulty easier to carry, but it gives it a function that goes beyond pain. It positions the hard period not as a punishment or a failure, but as a specific state of being, one that makes certain kinds of recognition possible that would not have been available any other way, which raises the next layer of the question. If difficult times open perception, what is the psychological mechanism by which that signal becomes visible? And is that movement something real? Or is it simply the mind doing what minds do under stress? The psychology of noticing. Let's address the skeptical voice directly. Because it is there. You have heard it. Maybe it is the first thing that appears every time you see 1111 and feel that pull of significance. the internal voice that says, "You are only noticing this because you are looking for it." This is confirmation bias. This is what a mind under stress does. It finds patterns because it needs patterns. It creates meaning because meaning is more bearable than randomness. That voice is not wrong to exist. Critical thinking is not an obstacle to understanding. It is part of the process. And anyone offering spiritual insight who asks you to simply silence that voice and believe is asking you to do something that is neither honest nor necessary. So let's take the skeptical argument seriously. And then let's examine where it breaks down. The confirmation bias explanation works like this. You began noticing 1111 at some point, assigned it meaning, and now your brain, which is extraordinarily good at finding what it is primed to find, notices it more often and filters out the hundreds of other number combinations that appear throughout your day. You remember the 1111 sightings and forget the 247s, the 813s, the 630s. The pattern feels real because memory is selective, not because the pattern is statistically significant. This is a coherent argument. And for casual, low-frequency number noticing, it may be entirely sufficient, but it does not fully account for what you are actually experiencing, because the phenomenon you are living through is not simply noticing a number more often. It is noticing a specific number in specific emotional contexts with a precision that goes beyond what selective memory alone would predict. It is the number appearing in moments of emotional friction so consistently that the correlation itself becomes data worth examining. And here is where psychology becomes interesting rather than dismissive. Research into attentional priming, the way emotional states direct noticing, reveals something important. During periods of stress, grief, and transition, the human attentional system does not simply become more reactive to all stimuli equally. It becomes selectively sensitive to stimuli that carry symbolic or emotional relevance to the internal state the person is experiencing. The mind under pressure is not randomly hyper-alert. It is specifically attuned, looking beneath the surface of conscious intention for information that speaks to the transition it is navigating. This means that the noticing of 1111 during difficult times is not arbitrary. Even within a purely psychological framework, the fact that this specific pattern is surfacing in your awareness during this specific emotional period reflects a genuine attentional signal. Your internal state is directing your perception towards something it recognizes as relevant. The question psychology alone cannot fully answer is, relevant to what? Because pattern recognition during transition is not simply the mind generating false comfort. It is the mind doing what it is designed to do during significant change, scanning for orientation, for coordinates, for any signal that can help map the interior territory of an experience that feels, from the inside, unmappable. 1111 is a coordinate, and your mind has been finding it again and again because something in you already senses that it marks something real, not imagined. Real in the way that symbols are real, which is not the reality of objects you can hold, but the reality of meaning that organizes experience, that creates coherence from confusion, that gives shape to the shapeless interior of a life in the middle of changing. To understand what that coordinate actually marks, you need to look at the number itself, not as a cultural symbol, but structurally, geometrically, at what 1111 actually is, in the most precise sense, and why that structure is inseparable from the emotional territory it consistently appears within. The geometry of 1111. Look at the number itself for a moment. Not what people say it means, not the interpretations layered over it by numerology traditions or spiritual communities. Just the number, its structure, what it actually is when you examine it directly. 4 ones, arranged in 2 pairs, perfectly mirrored. A number that reads identically from left to right and right to left. A number that, when you look at it on a digital clock, presents as 4 vertical lines of equal height and equal weight. A visual symmetry so complete that it barely resembles a number at all. It resembles something closer to a threshold, a doorway. 2 pillars on either side of a passage that has no walls, only the suggestion of an opening. This is not spiritual interpretation. This is structure. and structure carries meaning independently of any tradition that has ever commented on it. The number 1, in its most fundamental mathematical identity, represents undivided singularity. It is the origin point, the unit from which all other numbers emerge. Before multiplication, before addition, before any mathematical relationship exists, there is one. Singular, complete, undivided. When 4 ones appear together, they do not simply add up to 4. They create a repetition of origin, a pattern that returns 4 times to the same fundamental point. And the specific arrangement of 1111, 2 and 2, separated by a colon, mirror equal on both sides, creates something that functions, symbolically, as a point of perfect balance between 2 states, before and after. What was and what is becoming, the known and the unknown, the identity you have been carrying, and the identity forming in the disruption of your current circumstances. 1111 is a threshold number, not because tradition says so, though tradition has recognized this, but because its geometry enacts a threshold. It is a number that stands exactly between 2 identical sides of itself, a moment of perfect symmetry in the middle of an experience that feels from the inside anything but symmetrical. The moments in which 1111 consistently appears, the moments of emotional friction, inner tension, unresolved transition, are precisely the moments in which a person is standing between 2 versions of their own life, between what has been and what has not yet arrived, between the identity forged by circumstances now dissolving and the identity that will be shaped by whatever comes next. The number appears at the threshold because you are standing at a threshold. Its geometry reflects your geography, the interior landscape of someone who is exactly between, who has not yet crossed, who is standing in the specific, uncomfortable space that exists between the ending of one chapter and the beginning of another that has not yet made itself clear. This is not coincidence. This is correspondence. The symbol and the situation share the same structure, and that shared structure is the source of the recognition you feel every time the number appears. You are not simply reading meaning into it. You are recognizing it. And recognition feels different from interpretation because it does not require effort. It arrives before the mind can construct it. But here is where the understanding needs to go one layer deeper. Because if 1111 is a threshold marker that appears during transition, the natural assumption is that it arrives as confirmation, as reassurance, as a signal that you are where you are supposed to be, doing what you are supposed to be doing, and that everything will resolve in the right direction. That assumption is understandable. It is also, in an important way, incomplete. Synchronicity is not a comfort. Carl Jung spent decades studying the relationship between inner psychological states and outer symbolic events. He was not a mystic in the popular sense. He was a rigorous, clinically trained psychologist whose patients kept reporting something he could not explain away and refused to dismiss. Meaningful coincidences. Events in the external world that mirrored, with uncanny precision, the internal states of the people experiencing them. Symbols that appeared in life at the exact moments they were appearing in the interior world of the psyche. He called this synchronicity. And his definition was precise: a meaningful coincidence between an inner psychological state and an outer event, connected not by cause and effect, but by meaning. Note what synchronicity is not in Jung's framework. It is not a reward. It is not confirmation that you are doing well, thinking correctly, or moving in an approved direction. It is something more neutral, more structural, and ultimately more honest than that. Synchronicity is a marker of alignment between inner and outer reality. It appears when the transformation occurring inside a person has reached sufficient intensity that the outer world's symbolic content begins to reflect that transformation back. The inner and the outer are speaking the same language at the same moment. The coincidence is meaningful because it reveals a correspondence that was already real, not because it creates one. This means that 1111 appearing during your difficult period is not arriving to tell you that your pain has a guaranteed resolution, or that you can relax, because something external is managing the outcome. It is arriving because the transformation happening inside you has reached the kind of intensity that synchronistic experience reflects. It is not comfort. It is confirmation of a different kind. Confirmation that what you are going through is real, that it matters, that the internal shift you are experiencing is substantial enough to generate the specific kind of inner-outer alignment that produces synchronistic events. This distinction matters because many people who see 1111 during difficult times wait for the difficulty to resolve. They treat the number as a promise of relief. And when relief does not come, when the situation continues to be hard, when the transition continues to feel disorienting, they begin to doubt the signal. They wonder if they misread it. But the signal did not promise relief. It marked reality. It marked the fact that something genuinely significant is in motion inside you. The number is not appearing to make your journey easier. It is appearing because your journey is real, and the specific kind of energy that 1111 carries is not designed to soothe. It is designed to do something else entirely, something that becomes, once you understand it, far more useful than comfort during the kind of transition you are currently navigating. The activating energy of 1111. Not all repeating numbers feel the same. If you have spent time in the territory of symbolic patterns, you already know this intuitively. 444 has a different quality than 111. 9999 carries a different emotional texture than 222. Each pattern produces a subtly distinct internal response, a different quality of recognition, a different felt sense in the body and the emotional field. 444 tends to feel stabilizing, grounding, like something solid appearing underfoot during an uncertain moment. Many people describe it as feeling held, protected, structurally supported. 999 feels like completion, a closing, the specific bittersweet sensation of something significant reaching its natural end, not collapsed, not broken, but genuinely finished in the way that a full story is finished. But 1111 does not feel like either of those things. And if you are honest about how you feel in the moment after seeing it, not what you think you should feel, but what you actually feel, you will likely recognize something closer to alertness than calm, something closer to activation than reassurance. 1111 does not soothe the situation. It heightens awareness of it. It arrives and something in you sharpens. A quality of attention that was diffuse becomes focused. A question that was circling beneath the surface of your conscious mind comes suddenly closer to the surface. The emotional weight you were carrying continues, but for a moment, you are more awake inside it, more present to what it actually is, and what it might mean. This is the activating energy of 1111. It does not come to resolve. It comes to illuminate, to make more visible what is already in motion, to bring into sharper focus the interior landscape of a transition that the ordinary defended mind would prefer to keep slightly out of focus. In the language of sacred numerology, 11 is consistently described as a master number, one that operates at a higher frequency than single digits, carrying an amplified version of the qualities of 1. And the core quality of 1 is initiation, beginning, the first movement from stillness into direction, the moment before definition, when possibility is still unresolved, but energy is already in motion. 2 11s, mirrored. The energy of initiation, doubled and reflected back on itself. Not a single beginning, but a beginning that is simultaneously aware of itself. A moment of initiation that carries within it the consciousness of what it is initiating. This is why 1111 does not feel passive. It arrives as a doorway, and doorways by their nature imply movement. They imply that something is meant to pass through. The activation you feel when you see 1111 is the accurate emotional response to a symbol whose core function is to wake something up, to bring to conscious awareness what has been operating just below the threshold of full recognition. To make the transition, you are in the middle of more real to you, more present, more undeniable, more impossible to continue navigating on autopilot. This is what the number is doing every time you see it, and feel that indefinable stillness followed by alertness. It is not comforting you. It is making you more conscious. And in the context of a significant life transition, increased consciousness is not a luxury, it is a necessity. But what happens when 1111 does not simply appear? It begins to escalate. When the frequency increases, when it starts appearing not once or twice a day, but multiple times, in contexts that feel increasingly impossible to attribute to chance. When the pattern escalates. There is a specific quality of disorientation that arrives when 1111 stops being an occasional occurrence and becomes a relentless one. It is on the clock when you wake. It appears on the receipt at the coffee shop. The video you pause to think about something. When you look back at the timestamp, it reads 1111. You are driving and the car in front of you has a license plate that ends in 1111. You open your phone without intention and the time reads 1111, and there is a notification that arrived at 11:11 a.m. When this begins to happen, the natural response oscillates between two extremes. Either it feels increasingly meaningful, almost urgent, as if something is trying to reach you with a message that cannot wait, or it begins to feel destabilizing, as if you are losing your grip on the boundary between meaningful coincidence and the kind of pattern finding that signals something has gone wrong in your perception. Both responses make sense, and neither of them is the most useful frame for understanding what escalation actually means. Here is what the escalation reflects. Symbolic repetition does not operate at a constant frequency. It responds to the intensity of the internal transformation it is marking. When the inner shift is mild, a small recalibration, a minor reorientation, the symbolic signal appears occasionally gently, almost as a quiet note in the background. But when the internal transformation reaches a critical threshold, when what is changing inside you is not a detail, but a fundamental restructuring of how you understand yourself and your life, the signal amplifies. The escalation of 1111 is not a malfunction, it is a proportional response. It is appearing more because more is happening, not necessarily in your external circumstances, which may look relatively stable to the outside observer, but in the interior terrain of your identity, your understanding, and your relationship with the life you have been living. Think of it this way. A compass needle does not spin randomly. It responds to the magnetic field around it. When the field is consistent and stable, the needle holds steady. When the field intensifies or shifts dramatically, the needle becomes more active, moving, seeking, responding to forces that the surface environment does not make visible. You are the needle. The escalating 1111 is the needle moving, and what that movement reflects is a field of interior transformation that has reached an intensity significant enough to produce consistent, amplified symbolic resonance. Something inside you is changing at a level deep enough that the signal cannot remain quiet. It has to intensify, because the transformation it is marking has intensified. This should not frighten you, but it should make you stop moving through the repetition as a curiosity and start engaging with it as the communication it appears to be. Because escalation always means the same thing in the language of symbolic experience. It means the pattern is not waiting for you to get ready. Whatever is moving inside you has already reached a point where the question is no longer whether to engage with the transition, but how honestly and consciously you are willing to do so. And that brings us to the question the number has been pointing toward all along. Not outward, toward circumstances and external resolutions. Inward, toward something specific, something you already carry, what the number is actually pointing toward. This is the part most people are not quite ready for when they come looking for information about 1111, because most searches for the meaning of a repeating number are, underneath the stated question, a search for reassurance. A search for someone to confirm that what is happening to you is happening for a reason, that the pain has a purpose, that the confusion will resolve into clarity. That is a completely understandable thing to want. But 1111 is not pointing toward reassurance. It is pointing toward recognition. And there is a significant difference between those two things. Reassurance comes from outside. It says, everything will be fine, you are not alone, there is a plan. It speaks to the fear and the exhaustion, and temporarily reduces both. But it does not change anything in the interior landscape of the person receiving it, because it does not require anything from them. Recognition is different. Recognition comes from inside. It says you already know what this is pointing toward. You have known for a while. You have been circling it, approaching it and retreating, catching glimpses of it, and then redirecting your attention because seeing it fully means accepting something you are not sure you are ready to accept. And the truth, the uncomfortable, precise, personally specific truth, is that 1111 has been appearing at the exact edges of that knowing, at the moments when the thing you have been avoiding comes closest to the surface. At the moments when the gap between what you are living and what you know you need to live becomes, for just a second, impossible to look away from. You know what it is. It might be a relationship that has completed itself but that you have been unwilling to release, because release requires facing a grief that feels disproportionately large. It might be a version of yourself, a role, an identity, a way of being in the world, that no longer fits the person you have quietly become, but that you have been performing because the alternative feels terrifying. It might be a path that was never truly yours, but that you built enough of your life around that. Walking away feels like abandoning yourself, rather than finding yourself. It might be a truth about what you need that you have been making very small, because making it large would require change on a scale your nervous system has decided for now is too much to bear. Whatever it is specifically, and only you know the precise shape of it. 1111 has not been appearing to tell you that you do not need to look at it. It has been appearing at the exact moments when you were closest to looking, marking those moments the way a finger marks a passage in a book, not writing the words, but drawing attention to what is already written. The number is not the message. The number is the pointer. And what it has been pointing at is something you have been quietly carrying through this entire difficult period, waiting for the right readiness before you allow yourself to fully see it. That readiness is not coming from outside. It is made in the act of looking, not before it, but in the moment of turning toward the thing you have been turning away from. And that turning is what the next question is about. Is there a larger structure to this difficult period? Does this kind of pain follow a pattern that leads somewhere specific? The hidden architecture of collapse. The hardest thing about being inside a difficult period is not the pain itself. It is the feeling that the pain has no shape, no direction, no internal logic that would make it possible to understand where you are within it, how long it will last, or what, if anything, it is building toward. It feels structureless, a fog with no edges, an experience that simply continues without the courtesy of revealing its purpose. But that feeling, the feeling of directionless, shapeless collapse, is itself part of the structure. It is one of the most recognizable phases within a process documented across every major tradition of human transformation, from the mystical literature of ancient civilizations to the clinical frameworks of modern depth psychology. Collapse, dissolution, and disorientation are not random misfortunes. They are a specific phase, the middle phase, of a transformation that follows a recognizable internal architecture. Every significant transition in human experience moves through the same three-part structure. First, there is the ending, the dissolution of something that was. A relationship, an identity, a belief about yourself or your life. Something that held shape begins to lose it. This is rarely chosen. It happens to you more than you choose it, and it is almost always accompanied by grief, confusion, and resistance, because the thing that is ending was real, and it mattered. Second, there is the space between, the territory that exists after the old has dissolved and before the new has arrived. This is where most people are when 1111 begins appearing most intensely. The disoriented, fog-like middle phase that feels so structureless because it literally is between structures. There is no identity to return to, and no identity yet formed to move toward. There is only the uncomfortable, uncertain, necessary experience of existing in the transition itself. Third, there is the reorganization, the slow, often invisible emergence of a new coherence, a different relationship with yourself and your life, not a return to what was, but something that could only have taken the shape it takes because of what the dissolution made possible. 1111 does not appear randomly within this architecture. It appears with particular intensity in the second phase, the between space, because that is the threshold, the exact territory the number's geometry has always represented, the mirror moment, the point of perfect symmetry between what was and what is becoming. You are not lost in a structureless fog. You are in the middle of a process that has a beginning, a middle, and a destination. The disorientation you are feeling is not evidence that something has gone wrong. It is evidence that the second phase is doing exactly what the second phase does, holding you in the necessary uncertainty of a transition that is not yet complete. Which raises the next question. If this is the structure, and 1111 marks the middle of it, what is the specific emotional terrain of that middle space? And why does it feel so much harder to navigate than any phase that came before? The liminal space. There is a word for the territory you are currently standing in. Anthropologists and psychologists both use it, though they arrived at it from different directions. The word is liminal, from the Latin word for threshold. And the liminal space is precisely what it sounds like, the space of the threshold itself. Not the room you left, not the room you are entering, the doorway between them. In ritual traditions across cultures, the liminal space was understood to be the most powerful and the most dangerous phase of any transformation. Powerful because it is the zone where identity becomes fluid, where the old self has released its shape and the new self has not yet taken form. Dangerous for exactly the same reason. Because in the absence of a fixed identity, everything feels uncertain. Everything that previously provided orientation, your role, your relationships, your understanding of where you are going, becomes temporarily unreliable as a source of stability. This is why the liminal space feels the way it does. Not because something has gone wrong with you, but because you are in a territory that is structurally designed to be disorienting. It cannot feel stable because stability belongs to the phases before and after it, not to the threshold itself. And here is the precise connection to 1111. The liminal space is where this number appears most consistently and most intensely, not before the transition begins, when you are still inside the familiar even if something beneath the surface is already shifting, not after the reorganization has taken root, when a new coherence has begun to provide orientation, but here, in this exact territory, in the between. Because 1111 is a threshold number, its geometry is the geometry of the doorway. And it keeps appearing because you are standing in the space that its structure has always represented, the space between two identical sides of a mirror, the moment of perfect symmetry that exists only at the crossing point. This means something important about your experience right now. The intensity of 1111 in your life is not just a marker of difficulty, it is a marker of location. It is telling you where you are within the larger transformation you are moving through, and where you are is not lost. It is not a dead end, it is the threshold, the most transformationally active, the most symbolically charged, and the most emotionally demanding territory in any significant life transition. You have not arrived here by accident, and you will not remain here indefinitely. The liminal space has a far edge, just as it has a near edge. What waits on the far side is not a return to what was. That room is closed. What waits is the person you are in the process of becoming, and that person is being shaped right now by exactly the experience you are inside. But to move through the threshold rather than remain frozen at it, something specific is required, something the rational, evidence-demanding mind finds deeply difficult, something the current culture does not particularly prepare you for, trusting without proof. Here is the difficulty. Everything you have been taught about navigating uncertainty points in the same direction. Gather more information, analyze the options, wait for clearer evidence before committing to a direction, and do not allow what you cannot prove to influence decisions that matter. That is a reasonable framework for many situations. It is not a useful one for the liminal space, because the liminal space does not offer proof. It does not provide evidence in advance. It does not hand you a map of what comes next before asking you to take the next step. The transformation it is carrying does not announce itself with clarity before it arrives. It reveals itself through the process of moving through it. Not before, not from a safe observational distance, but in the actual movement. This is where 1111 asks something specific of the people who keep seeing it. Not blind faith, not the suspension of reason. What it asks is something more precise and in some ways more difficult. The willingness to allow a layer of awareness that operates below the threshold of logical proof to participate in how you move through what you are currently in. You have already been doing this, whether you have acknowledged it or not. Every time you felt that stillness after seeing 1111 and paused, even briefly, even skeptically, you were allowing something other than logic to speak. Every time the pattern drew your attention and held it, even as the rational voice questioned what it meant, you were navigating by two instruments simultaneously. The analytical mind and something older, something more directly connected to the interior terrain of your own transformation. Trusting without proof does not mean pretending certainty you do not have. It means recognizing that the navigation of significant personal transition has never been primarily a logical process, not for anyone, in any era, under any circumstances. The people who have moved most fully through their own thresholds were not the ones who waited for all the uncertainty to resolve before they took the next step. They were the ones who found a way to move while uncertain, who allowed the uncertainty to accompany them rather than demanding its removal as the price of forward motion. 1111 is not asking you to know what comes next. It is not asking you to have the destination figured out or the new identity fully formed before you allow yourself to begin crossing. It is marking the threshold and pointing toward the crossing. The specifics of what you cross into belong to the phase that follows this one, and they cannot be seen clearly from the near side of the doorway. What changes when you stop demanding proof before you trust the pattern? What becomes possible when you allow the signal to mean what it has been consistently pointing toward throughout this entire difficult period? That question has an answer, and it is what this entire script has been building toward. The other side of the signal. There is a moment, and most people who have moved through a significant life transition can identify it in retrospect, when the signal stops feeling like a question and starts feeling like a coordinate. Not the moment the difficulty ends, not the moment the new chapter announces itself with clarity. A quieter moment than that. An interior moment. A moment in which something that had been confused and pressured and uncertain inside you settles, not into answers, but into orientation. The feeling is not of a problem being solved. It is of a compass finally finding its direction after a long period of magnetic interference. This is what 1111 has been pointing toward throughout everything you have been moving through. Not the promise that the pain will stop or that the transition will resolve on a timetable that matches what your patience can tolerate. Not the guarantee that what comes next will be easier or clearer. The number has never offered those things. It has offered something more fundamental than comfort. It has offered the continuous reminder, appearing at the edges of your awareness during your most uncertain moments, that what is happening to you carries a direction you cannot yet fully see, and that the disorientation you feel is not evidence of failure but of process. The full meaning of 1111 during difficult times is this: you are at a threshold. You have been standing at it for longer than you expected. The difficulty of standing there, the emotional weight, the uncertainty, the exhaustion of not yet knowing what comes next, is not a sign that the threshold is the wrong place. It is a sign that the threshold is doing what thresholds do, asking everything of you before allowing you to pass through. What waits on the other side is not a return to who you were before the transition began. That version of you, and the life structured around it, was what the transition began dissolving. What waits is something that could only be reached through the specific territory you have been walking. A version of yourself more aligned with what is actually true about you. A life more coherent with the person the difficulty has been forming, beneath the surface of the pain, throughout this entire process. The signal does not end when the difficulty does. It evolves. What has been appearing as an urgent, relentless pattern during the hardest stretch of this transition will eventually become something quieter, a confirmation rather than a summons, an acknowledgement rather than a call to attention. because you will no longer need the intensity of the signal to draw your awareness toward what it is pointing at. You will already be facing it. You have been seeing 1111 during one of the hardest periods of your life because that is precisely when it has something real to mark. It has been appearing at the threshold because that is where you have been standing. And if you have stayed with this through everything it has moved through the psychology and the geometry and the synchronicity and the architecture of collapse and the liminal territory and the difficulty of trusting without proof, then you have already begun doing the thing the number has been pointing toward all along. You have turned toward it. You have allowed yourself to look. And what you find, when you look honestly at a threshold, is not an ending. It is the beginning of the crossing.